Hey everybody. Uh, gonna try to talk about poetry. Bear with me a little bit. This is the Zoom recording thing is kind of new for me. I might fumble a little bit, but hopefully this will be a little bit helpful as we move forward. So hopefully to get introduced to poetry, you read the selections from Stephen Minot in our Three Genres book that I gave you, What Makes a Poem, and then the later one about where poems come from, as well as the poems that I gave you links for to read. Those are a couple of them are some of my favorite poems of all time. But as we move forward, you should keep in mind the 5 distinctions that Minot points out that separate poetry and prose. One thing that he doesn't allow for is that there is a genre called prose poetry, which kind of puts some of these distinctions to rest, but we can talk about that some other time. And really, still as a rule, this works. But he talks about the line, right? So in prose, you have sentences. That's your unit. That's your unit of thought. That's your unit of conversation. That's your unit of writing, right? Poetry focuses on lines rather than sentences. In fact, some poetry doesn't utilize punctuation at all. My poetry, 85% of the time, doesn't use punctuation or capitalization. I don't use sentences. I just use lines and stanzas. And the stanza is like the paragraph of poetry, right? It's like a group of lines. Some people still use sentences, but then they use lines to further break up. And they do that for a lot of different reasons. Minot talks about a lot of different reasons why you would have what we call a line break. And the line break is where you choose to divide a line. And it signals to the reader a progression of thought, or it signals a change. It can do a lot of different things. It's timing and rhythm. We call that enjambment too. Where you break a line is where you enjam a line. It's enjambment. It talks about images over abstraction. Abstraction meaning abstract concepts like love, honor, pride, humility. And poetry doesn't really engage with those things like an essay would, or even a novel would. And that sounds silly, right? Because we've read hundreds of love poems. You've read love poems for today. Like, poems deal with these kinds of things, right? The difference is that they deal with those things through concrete images and through building images. And that can include, metaphors, simile, allegory, things like that, symbolism generally. So doing those things to represent concepts or to explain concepts that are abstract, not to deal with them in abstraction themselves, if that makes sense. Sound is something that's always important to poetry. Most often we think about sound as rhyme. It's not always rhyme. It's sometimes rhyme. And it's sometimes rhyme in what we would call form poetry. So 2 major distinctions in poetry is what we call form and what we call free verse. There are others too, like experimental poetry, like E.E. Cummings would put, words all over the page, things like that. But in most form poetry, the form is that there is an established set of rules for these poems. So like a sonnet or a villanelle. For example, we can look at Shakespeare's sonnet that I assigned you for today, and we can look at some of those things and how the rhyme works there. But like a sonnet has 14 lines. It's 3 quatrains, 3 lines of 4, or 3 stanzas of 4 lines. There's a particular rhyme scheme in each of them. It's A, B, A, B, so the first line rhymes with the third line, second with the fourth, and that repeats in those 3, and then it ends in a rhyming couplet, 2 lines at the bottom. That's a form. That's how you write a sonnet. Free verse poetry doesn't have any of those things. It might still rhyme. The author, the poet, might put a rhyme scheme in for that poem, but they often don't rhyme just willy-nilly. That's not really how rhyming works. But sound goes beyond that, right? There are other ways that you can make poems sound in particular ways to make them sound, pleasant and beautiful and melodious and mellifluous. You might have like alliteration. You might have different words that play off of each other. You might have just onomatopoeia, right? Like you spell out the sound itself. And sometimes it's none of that. And sometimes words just sound pretty when you put them together in particular ways. Rhythm, Two, we often think of rhythm as like syllables or meter. So the most common ways that we see rhythm are, again, like the Shakespearean sonnet that you read for today. We'll take a look in a minute. But that's iambic pentameter. You don't have to remember what iambic pentameter is, what it means, whatever. Iambic pentameter is a specific meter, and you can hear it in all kinds of Shakespeare's works. But it's a rhythm, and it's a number of that repeating rhythm. So when you read that first line, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It's iambic pentameter. And that means that it goes unstressed, stressed, 5 times a line. And so if I was in class, this would drive you bonkers, but you go, when I compare thee to a summer's day. Unstressed, stressed. When I compare thee to a summer's day. That's an iamb. That's why we call it iambic. And then pentameter means that it does that 5 times a line. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? You don't have to remember any of that. I will make you try stuff like that. But that's meter, right? So there's a bunch of different ways that meter works and a bunch of different ways that we can try it out. Syllables are a little more simple. Syllables are just how many syllables per line you've got, and that's syllabic poetry. That's like a haiku. We'll read a couple haikus. You'll write a haiku before it's all said and done with. But it's just how many syllables per line. And that sets up a good rhythm too, right? So haiku specifically is an old form. It's very short. It's 3 lines and 5 syllables in the first, 7 syllables in the second, and 5 syllables in the bottom. Pretty easy to write. And you can count syllables in any word, right? We used to do this in like elementary school. But so my favorite haiku to teach is haiku are easy, but sometimes they don't make sense. Refrigerator. We can count that out, right? Haiku are easy. Sometimes they don't make sense, but sometimes they don't make sense. Sorry. Refrigerator. 575. We'll deal with that too, but that's syllabic, that's rhythm. Sometimes it's also just the way that you read. There might not be a pre-programmed form. It just might have a good rhythm to it, right? It might be an established form. It might be an unintentional form. It might be an unrepeated form, but the way that we read something can have a rhythm too. And then finally, he talks about density, meaning that poems represent more than what they literally say. And I think that that's often true, and I think that that's a pretty typical characteristic of poetry. But poetry doesn't always have to be super dense and doesn't have to be really, really confusing or meaningful. Sometimes poetry is simple, but even in that simplicity, it usually means more than just the words on the page, right? So we'll read some very, very short poetry next week especially, and it will mean a lot more than just the words on the page. And that's the difference between connotation and denotation, right? So denotation, what something actually means, and connotation, all of the things that are kind of implied or that go along with it. And this can be also done through symbolism, metaphor, allegory, a bunch of different things, the use of imagery, right? So that density is a pretty typical characteristic. He talks again about the difference between simple and literary poetry. I'm not sure that I buy those distinctions. I think that that might be pedantic or pretentious from time to time. So we don't really need to worry too much about what makes something really literary, because those distinctions don't always hold up depending on who's reading them. But at the end of the day, poems do tend to mean more than just the words on the page, even when they're really, really simple poems. But so let's take a look at a couple of the poems today. Let me share a different screen with you. I don't think I want to start with James Baldwin. Let's start with Jack Gilbert. Jack Gilbert's a Pittsburgh poet. This is one of my favorite poems. A dog appears in it. I would show you Poet, but he's in bed right now. It's a little late, but hopefully one of these video lectures he'll make an appearance. Don't tell him I'm drinking out of my Garfield mug though. Okay, Alone by Jack Gilbert. I never thought Machiko would come back after she died. But if she did, I knew it would be as a lady in a long white dress. It is strange that she has returned as somebody's Dalmatian. I meet the man walking her on a leash almost every week. He says good morning, and I stoop down to calm her. He said once that she was never like that with other people. Sometimes she is tethered on their lawn when I go by. If nobody is around, I sit on the grass. When she finally quiets, she puts her head in my lap, and we watch each other's eyes as I whisper in her soft ears. She cares nothing about the mystery. She likes it best when I touch her head and tell her small things about my days and our friends. That makes her happy the way it always did. I love this poem. And, much like fiction, sometimes the best poetry is based or, has something to do with real life experience that we turn into something beautiful. Jack Gilbert was married to a woman named Chico who kind of tragically died young or younger. And he dealt with that for a long time. And one of the ways that he dealt with that was through writing about her. But I love this poem. So you can see the difference between lines and sentences here. He still uses sentences, but his line breaks, his enjambment, makes it different, right? So he uses that to make a form. It's not a pre-prescribed form. It's not or just prescribed. It's not a set form. It's not a typical form. It's just his form for this poem. He wants it to look a particular way so that we read it a particular way. The enjambment will also tell us, it signals to us maybe when to pause, when it's not the end of a sentence, and then the sentence, so you can kind of utilize both, right? So if you read those first two lines, I never thought Machiko would come back after she died. But if she did, I knew it would be as a lady. So you can see how those pauses can be helpful in reading. And then also you can see that he has a shape. It's not a set form, but there's a shape to this poem, right? The lines are almost, they're pretty close to the same size. And that gives us a visual way to read it too. We can look at this maybe in comparison with a different poem that utilizes some of these things too. So let's look at Persimmons by Liang Li. He's one of my favorite poets as well. He's still alive, Asian American poet outside of Chicago. This deals with lines, and here we have stanzas too, the paragraph of the poem. But you can see how he's utilizing sentences, lines, and stanzas. Also, this is particularly important with imagery and sound. We can also talk about rhythm for any of these, right? So just the way that these don't have set meter, these don't have set syllables, but you can hear a rhythm in the way that we're reading them. This one's a little bit longer. We'll talk about it quickly, and then we'll look at the sonnet quickly, and then I'll stop at the fear of going for too long. This poem does have a little bit of sexual imagery in it, just a heads up. So if you'd like to skip ahead, feel free. It's not that bad. Persimmons. In 6th grade, Mrs. Walker slapped the back of my head and made me stand in the corner for not knowing the difference between persimmon and precision. How to choose persimmons. This is precision. Ripe ones are soft and brown spotted. Sniff the bottoms. The sweet one will be fragrant. How to eat. Put the knife away. Lay down newspaper. Peel the skin tenderly, not to tear the meat. Chew the skin, suck it, and swallow. Now eat the meat of the fruit, so sweet, all of it to the heart. You can hear a rhythm in this stanza, right? This is precision. Ripe ones are soft and brown spotted. Sniff the bottoms. The sweet one will be fragrant. How to eat. Put the knife away. Lay down the newspaper. You can feel the rhythm. You can feel the spacing. You can see what the periods are doing. You can see what the stanza break is doing. And none of it is prescribed. This is all free verse. He's choosing the form as he goes. He plans it, but it's not an established form. Okay. Now eat the meat of the fruit, so sweet, all of it to the heart. Donna undresses, her stomach is white. In the yard, dewy and shivering with crickets, we lie naked, face up, face down. I teach her Chinese. Crickets, choo-choo. Do, I've forgotten. Naked, I've forgotten. Ni wo, you and me. I part her legs, remember to tell her she is beautiful as the moon. Other words that got me into trouble were fright and fright, wren and yarn. Fight was what I did when I was frightened. Fright was what I felt when I was fighting. Wrens are small, plain birds. Yarn is what one knits with. Wrens are soft as yarn. My mother made birds out of yarn. I love to watch her tie the stuff, a bird, a rabbit, a wee man. And here you can see the sound, right? So these words that don't rhyme, but words that sound almost like they could be related, and words that he as a second language learner got confused. And he's playing with sounds in ways that we don't need rhyme, and we don't need syllables, and we don't need meter. These are just ways that he's playing with sound and rhythm to make us interpret all of it differently. We'll pick up right where I left off. Mrs. Walker brought a persimmon to class and cut it up so everyone could taste a Chinese apple. Knowing it wasn't ripe or sweet, I didn't eat, but watched the other faces. My mother said every persimmon has a sun inside, something golden, glowing, warm as my face. Once, in the cellar, I found 2 wrapped in newspaper, forgotten and not yet ripe. I took them and set them both on my bedroom windowsill, where each morning a cardinal sang, "The sun, the sun." Finally understanding he was going blind, my father sat up all one night, waiting for a song, a ghost. I gave him the persimmons, swelled, heavy as sadness and sweet as love. This year, in the muddy lighting of my parents' cellar, I rummaged, looking for something I lost. My father sits on the tired wooden stairs, black cane between his knees, hand over hand, gripping the handle. He's so happy that I've come home. I ask how his eyes are, a stupid question. All gone, he answers. Under some blankets, I find a box. Inside the box, I find 3 scrolls. I sit beside him and untie 3 paintings by my father, hibiscus leaf and a white flower, 2 cats preening, 2 persimmons so full they want to drop off from the cloth. He raises his hands to touch the cloth. Which is this? This is persimmons, father. Oh, the feel of the wolf tail on the silk, the strength, the tense precision in the wrist. I painted them hundreds of times, eyes closed. These I painted blind. Some things never leave a person. Scent of the hair of one you love, the texture of persimmons in your palm, the right weight. So he's not only playing with sound and rhythm and things like that, but he's also dealing with imagery, right? So images to deal with larger concepts. This poem is about memory. He's remembering things. His father is remembering things. His blind father is remembering persimmons. And so the persimmons are symbolic somehow. You know, there's this image of the persimmons that comes up from the very beginning. It's the title of the poem. We're not going to do too much analysis here. You might want to write about that in your discussion, though. But we can see that he's using the image of the persimmon to talk about things, right? He's using his blind father to talk about things. What those larger concepts are might be abstract, right? Memory, love, loss, things like that. But he's using these concrete images to talk about them. Confusion about words when he was a child, right? Persimmons and precision. He's talking about those big things through these images, like the image of the persimmon. He's also, this is density, right? So this poem is about a lot more than just the persimmon, right? So what are the other things that he's trying to teach us or talk about, or that he's exploring, right? How do you think his relationship is with his father? You know, why does he remember the woman in the grass in the middle? And there's some interesting things about language here too, right? He confuses persimmon and precision in other words because it's not his first language. And then so when he goes to teach the woman in the middle of the poem Chinese, he forgets a lot of it. So language is important here too. What's he saying about language? Things like that. This is all stuff that you could write about in this poem or any of the others that you read for today. Also a free verse poem, right? But let's take a quick look at not a free verse poem. This is a sonnet. A sonnet is one of the most fixed forms, maybe just next to the villanelle. Villanelles are tricky. You can do it. I might make you do it, in fact. But yeah, a sonnet. So this has a fixed rhyme scheme. This has a fixed meter, iambic pentameter. You'll hear it again. It's got a fixed number of lines and a fixed number of lines in each stanza, which these stanzas aren't broken up, but I'll show you where the stanzas are broken. This is about as fixed as you can get, but he's still doing all of those other things too. Even though he's doing this stuff explicitly, it's got all of those other qualities too, right? Imagery, density. What were the other ones? Well, yeah, line, images, sound, rhythm, density. It's all here too. It's just a very different approach to it. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's leaf hath all too short a date. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines. By chance or nature's changing course untrimmed, but thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Lots of things happening here. We've got 14 lines total, which is broken up into four lines in 3 different stanzas, and then one combo of 2 at the bottom. And you can see this is a couplet. And then, why can I not? There we go. Why is it? Okay. Why is it? All right, so first couplet. First quatrain, a group of 4 lines. There are 14 lines total. We've got 3 quatrains and 1 couplet to make 14. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. That's 1 quatrain of 4 lines. There's a rhyme scheme there. A, B, A, B. Day rhymes with May. Temperate rhymes with date. So that A and B signifies what words rhyme at the end of the line. The next quatrain will have the same rhyme scheme, but they don't rhyme with any of those words. So this will be CD, CD. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. So we've got shines rhyming with declines and dimmed with untrimmed. And then in the final quatrain there, we've got fade, owest, shade, and growest. Fade rhymes with shade, owest with growest. So our rhyme scheme so far is AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, and then we have our couplet, and it's the last 2 lines, and they rhyme with each other, C and D, so GG. All sonnets follow that rhyme scheme. That's what they do. It's also got 14 lines. You need 14 lines to have a sonnet, and you have to have that iambic pentameter. So each line will have that same rhythm, same number of syllables. Shall I compare, I won't even count. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And all of the lines will have that rhythm. Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease I always do that, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines. It's the whole way through, and sonnets have to do that too. But it's accomplishing all of those things in a very different way. It's got the imagery, right? The imagery of the summer day. It's got the density. What is the thing that lives and gives life to this person that he's writing about in that couplet? It's the poem, right? So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to these. So he's talking about this person who's lovely, and this poem will make them live in eternity, because as long as the poem exists, somebody's still reading about this person, right? Okay, you read these other ones, so I won't spend any time talking about them, but you should feel free to talk about them. I don't want to give you a massive video lecture. So keep in mind that you should go to do your discussion post, where you're going to talk about your expectations for poetry, and then how these poems kind of fit or defy those expectations. You can use some of those terms that we talked about at the beginning. Maybe focus on some of the poems that we didn't get to talk about in this video. And then also you have an exercise. You're going to try to write a poem. Don't care if it has form, don't care if it has any kind of lines, don't care if it rhymes, don't care if it makes any sense. I just want you to try it, especially if you've never written a poem. Some of you have, that's great. You can try to write a good one. Otherwise, just get it out there. Just do it, just to say that you've done it. So I think that will be it, and I will look forward to seeing your posts, and I will try to do a better job at this next time. All right.